Beatles' breakup remains one of the most discussed events in the history of music. Each member of the band had their own perspective on what caused the group's collapse. And even more than 5 decades after the official split, fans continue to speculate about the real reasons behind it. While opinions vary, one undeniable source of tension was the informal hierarchy that developed within the band. Both John Lennon and Paul McCartney addressed this dynamic in the Peter Jackson documentary The Beatles, Get Back. George Harrison also made his dissatisfaction clear during the group's final years, often noting that he was typically only allowed to include 1 or 2 of his own compositions per album, while the majority of the tracks were always reserved for the Lennon-McCartney partnership. What many fans might not realize, however, is that Harrison actually contributed lyrics to a couple of iconic Beatles tracks that were officially credited only to Lennon and McCartney. Songwriting credits often become a sensitive issue within bands, and the Beatles were no exception. In the early years, the situation was straightforward. Lennon and McCartney were the primary songwriters, and their collaboration dated back to their teenage years. As their success grew, they formalized an agreement. Regardless of who wrote what, every song they created together would be credited jointly as Lennon-McCartney. This partnership became one of the most legendary in music history, but its efficiency relied on the fact that they were, at that time, the group's sole writers. By the mid-1960s, George Harrison began to come into his own as a songwriter. Initially, he pushed for his songs to be included in a more reserved manner, but eventually, he became more assertive about having his contributions acknowledged. Lennon and McCartney were willing to accept this, to a limited degree. Harrison was generally permitted to include a maximum of 3 songs per album, though more often than not, he was limited to fewer. Over time, this imbalance led to growing frustration on Harrison's part. Even when he wasn't credited, there were cases where he clearly had a hand in shaping major songs that went on to be Lennon-McCartney classics. In a 1987 interview, he touched on this point while discussing his relationship with Lennon before Lennon's death. By then, Harrison had released an autobiography titled I, Me, Mine, named after his song from the Let It Be album. Reportedly, Lennon had been upset that Harrison failed to acknowledge his influence on Harrison's songwriting. According to Harrison, Lennon had been frustrated that Harrison didn't mention he had written a single line in Taxman. In response, Harrison pointed out that he himself had written 2 lines in Come Together and 3 lines in Eleanor Rigby, yet had never received credit for them. He explained that he had deliberately chosen not to delve into songwriting details in the book, but if he had, he would have had more reason to feel hurt than Lennon did. Given that Come Together and Eleanor Rigby are 2 of the most well-known Beatles tracks, and still credited exclusively to Lennon-McCartney, it's understandable that Harrison would feel wronged after years of minimal recognition, especially when being criticized over a single lyric.